Hey, so I'm just gonna run through some uh, some of the basic rigging stuff. This will be like a rigging demo to go along with the midterm project, the rigging midterm project. I have a character here that I'm gonna set up and rig, um, but on Blackboard, there's a couple versions here. There's a male and female version. You can download either of these and rig those, or you could rig one um, that you've modeled yourself. But if you don't have that ready already, I would use the ones that are up there, and they should be pretty good for um, most purposes. They'll be kind of airtight, so to speak. Um, so let's get started. I'm gonna just make sure I combine both of these things here. So there's a couple ways that we could rig this. We could do this the maybe more sort of traditional way. Um, the first thing we're going to want to do here is probably just make sure we're on the rigging tab, and then we could go to skeleton, and we could create a bunch of joints. Um, if we make enough joint, we could mirror those joints. We can orient the joints so that they kind of go along the arm, so that the arm will then rotate properly along one axis, which is what we want. And then we could bind everything. We could do things that way. So that's one way of doing this. Another way that can be a little bit easier um, is to use human IK. Human IK will sort of create the whole rig for us. We just need to put it in place, and then we can kind of mirror some things through there, and we can create a control rig through there as well. This is probably a good place to start. It's not always super easy if you want to edit things a bunch. And sometimes you can run into issues using it, which can make things more difficult than if you were to just do it the traditional way. But there's a pretty good possibility that if we use it, it'll just be pretty easy and quick. So we'll just start out by sort of doing that. So I'm just going to click that button, Human IK. Similar, we could kind of click this little button up here, and this will kind of bring it up. This is all, I'm using Maya 2018. Some of it may vary slightly depending on the version that you're in. So I'm going to click to start, just create skeleton. It's going to make a really large skeleton, a lot bigger than our model. So I'm going to bring down the scale here. There we go. Okay. And I can kind of keep doing that till we get something that's a bit closer to what we want. Let's maybe try. Let's check out our wireframe. Too much there, so maybe two there. This kind of that's gonna happen. Maybe we'll say 0.9, just to 1.95. It's kind of, I'm trying to get this relatively close here, 0.975. I'll try not to be maybe too picky with it. My joints are also looking a little bit small. This may or may not happen for you. If it does, we'll just go to display, animation joint size, and we can kind of up them a little bit so we get something that looks a little easier to use. Let's turn off our ground layer for now. Okay. So I do have a bunch of geometry here that may make it a little bit hard to see, but we want to just we want to make sure that when we're looking at this, things kind of line up. This will be the center of our character, so I'll sort of pull this forward a little bit, and then you can kind of just see some things aren't quite there. So part of this process will be just moving our joints. I do want to keep maybe a little bit of a forward bit in here with the IK. We're going to want to make sure that our IK bends forward, and so that means we're going to want to keep the IK straight. We're going to want to keep it pretty straight, and obviously like these characters' legs aren't quite doing that. So maybe I'll just bring it over a little bit, really sort of pushing more here than I'd probably like, but I do want to keep it straight because that's going to make it so that when we pull this leg up, and you'll sort of see when we make the IK, we want that to kind of go straight up. So if I was to sort of like bring this part in and bring this over, we might run into problems later. So I'm going to try and keep that straight. And then with this, it would be good, and maybe we could cheat this a little, bring this a little bit back. You do kind of want this to go a little bit forward because that will also sort of make it so that when we pull up our foot from the ankle, we want the knee to bend forward over here. And if we don't keep that leg straight, it's probably not going to do that. So we want it sort of straight from the front, but from the side, we want it to go forward a little bit so that when the algorithm reads it, it's sort of pushing it a little bit forward. Now I did change this what is the left leg? So I'm clicking this button over here on the right, and that's going to mirror that change that I made there. So let's kind of go and place some more of these. That's kind of okay. This is okay-ish. I'd rather have this on an edge loop, but maybe we could. We'll bring it down. I'm going to bring the chest up a little bit though, and I'm going to bring. These are sort of my clavicle joints here. You do want them to stay above the chest. You can kind of run into issues if they don't stay above the chest. So we're going to want to make sure we do that. Now this is going to be my neck bone. And let's just sort of pull out the outliner. Now I've got a bunch of extra stuff here, but also if you hold shift and click, you can sort of see the full drop down here, which is nice. So, and the nice thing about using Human IK, it names everything for us, so we can see that that's the neck. That's not quite on the character's neck. So we want to sort of pull that, push that into the middle of the neck. And then the head, I'm going to kind of, you could put it in the middle, you could also kind of put it at the top. Sometimes Human IK likes it for it to sort of be at the top. but maybe we'll just sort of go, we're not going to have like an end joint here, so maybe we'll just kind of go in the middle there. Alright, so we've got our neck one, our shoulder ones are kind of in place. We could probably pull some of these shoulder joints back a little bit. I'm going to sort of maybe keep this up. I'm just going to put it off to the side on another window. And let's see, I could probably pull this chest up a little bit. Pull this down a smidge. Pull this back a little bit. That's kind of lining up. And then let's double check sort of the neck, so maybe we'll bring it back forward again. Our head in here somewhere. And now that we've got that, let's just make sure we mirror it and kind of keep it even. Cool. So now, I could probably just rotate this a bit. Yeah, let's rotate it. I was thinking if we should transform it, but let's rotate it. I'm going to pull this in. Make sure we keep that along the arm. Let's see if we can switch to X-ray and see this a little bit better. So, pull this in. I want this kind of on the elbow. Maybe we can sort of pull it in there. And then I'm just going to rotate this in one axis along the hands. Let's see if that'll help a little bit there. This could be the part too where it takes a little bit. I might sort of cheat this a little bit. We could kind of go back to a smaller joint size here. So go back to 1. This could be smaller. Here's one where the size of my hands, I can probably afford to just put a joint on the end here. Right there. And I'm going to try and do this. Getting it, whoops, that's what I want. Let's see if I can't do this kind of quickly. But you would want to sort of spend some time getting this accurate and kind of close. Pull that down. Put this one over here. Pretty. Let's see. Let's maybe back those up a little bit. Oops. All right. Could maybe use a little more tweaking, but just going to go back to that clavicle and see about just mirroring that. So we've got that even on both sides. Okay. And now everything is sort of, and actually, let's just do this. Let's just save this while we're here. It's always good to sort of save an iteration, especially as you're going into the next steps. Whoops. Delete that. Delete this here. Don't think I can delete it there. Okay. We'll just call it 1 for this rig. So you do sort of want to be done with modeling, and then now I'm breaking it, so I'll just rename it. It's in a rigs folder. We'll call it Go 1, and we'll save that so that we have this. So basically, we'll save it so that we've kind of got a rig placed. Should probably pull these forward. So we've got our rig placed. We'll save this. And now I'm just going to save another version of this. We'll call this 2, so that in case anything goes wrong, which it can definitely happen with the rigging, we'll have all that time spent placing the joints. We won't lose that if something does go horribly wrong. So we've got our rig, and we're just about ready to bind this to our character. So I want to select this at the root. I'm going to select our character. We'll go to Skin, Bind Skin. I'm going to hit the options. The bind method you want is geodesic voxel. It'll take ever so slightly longer. It's not very long. And it gives increased accuracy. So you want to make sure you're using that one. It'll save time in the long run. And then max influences, we want to do 2 because we're doing games. And we'll hit apply. And then this is sort of running. Now, this character has crazy sort of hair all over the place, so we would expect some sort of issues there. You can kind of see the hair is moving with the arm, but it does a pretty good job of maintaining some of the chest stuff there. Let's see. Let's try out a leg, and we can see sort of the leg moving. So it does a pretty good job. The hair and stuff will need to sort of be worked out. Let's maybe go off of our X-ray. So kind of cool, but definitely some stuff still needs to be worked out. That kind of stuff we can work out with our weight painting. So generally with that, you want to select and actually, we might even want to, just because we've bound it now, just make sure you keep saving in iterations. The file sizes themselves don't take up a lot. And you'll be happy if something goes wrong that you've got the extra versions. So we can select the geometry, and then we can go to Skin, Paint Skin Weights, and I'm going to hit the options, and then we'll get something like this here. And you want to make sure you're doing add. Notice it's on replace sort of by default. We want to make sure we're adding. If we do replace, it's going to put our weights somewhere randomly, and that's just going to complicate things. So what this does, and what we're trying to do, is, let's say for the head here, or even the neck. I'm going to select that influence, and we can see that the neck is controlling all this stuff, but really I probably want the neck to also move like all of this hair, and I just want it to like totally move. Anytime the neck moves, and we can maybe go with the neck over the head because the neck will also move the head. But I want the head to like move all the hair. So anywhere where I'm painting white is going to completely move stuff. If it's faded a little bit, it'll move it a little bit, and that's kind of where the process comes into play. We could change our opacity level if we wanted to fade this a little more, but like at least for right now, I know I'm going to kind of want to move all this stuff. But I am getting some of the chest there, which I'm going to have to go back and fix probably at some point. But we'll kind of just get most of this stuff. Get all that. Get some of that in here. One thing to note with this is you may want to try out, we'll put controls on this in a second, you may want to just, like, you know, we saved a version here, you may want to like try out doing the controls real quick and just make sure they do what you want before you end up spending a ton of time on this. Because if your controls don't work, you never know, you may end up having to go back to just your joints in the model and rebinding things, or you may need to go back and edit your joint structure, or edit maybe there's like history on your object or something like that that you didn't want. So usually I'd say do maybe like a quick run through of everything, make sure everything's going to work before you do end up putting a ton of time into this part, just so you make sure you're like not wasting time. Sometimes you might put a bunch of time in this and then you end up losing it. And there are workarounds. You can try and export out your weight maps. They're based on UVs. Sometimes that goes okay, sometimes it doesn't. So notice, so I've got some what is it? Oh, that's that thing. I've got some parts of the chest here, but that might be better left to maybe putting that onto the chest. So rather than doing something else or trying to replace or smooth it, I'm just going to go to the one where I think it should be, and let's lower our opacity here. So we're not grabbing too much. And then we can just put some of this back onto the chest, which is where we might expect it to be. Let's look at the arm. It's taking a little bit there. Like maybe we could put a little more of the arm here. Who knows? Maybe we could go back to the chest. Maybe we get a little on the chest. Maybe we want this as part of the chest. This should probably move with it. One other thing you can do, so if we like go to our neck now, we can just kind of test this and see how it does. And if we look at our transforms, whoops, we can kind of get an idea of where maybe those like transforms are. And I don't have any rotations on these. No, do I have rotations on these ones? No, so that's great. So that way, the reason why we want to look for our rotations is like we may move this, and then you can kind of see like, oh, that's maybe not so great. Maybe I don't want that. We can edit our weighting. Let's go back. We'll select the geometry again. Skin. We'll paint skin weights. We'll select the influence. Maybe we'll actually select our chest, and then maybe we can kind of like, while in that pose, we can then just kind of paint and sort of see like, is it better if I put a little bit more from the chest onto the arm. You know, you can just kind of see if you like what it does. A little bit. And then if you do, then you can kind of keep it. And I believe you can also mirror your skin weights. So in this case, positive to negative. I think we're kind of going more negative to positive. We could try and that didn't do what we want. Not sure that did what we wanted either. Yeah. Well, we can try. We can always try to mirror the skin weights. It may not kind of come exactly as we want. Select our skin again, paint skin weights, and let's put this more. On the chest there. Maybe some of this too. Oops. So that's sort of the weight painting process. And then whenever we're ready, you know, we can just kind of, we can then put that back. And we could probably put controls on this as well, and then just continue to paint weights. And just put the character in a bunch of different poses. You know, you could put them in some poses that you know you might end up using later on, like things from a walk cycle, and just see how it bends, and then just paint it and kind of fix it as you go. So I mentioned maybe not going too far without checking our controls. Now, even if you did just have this can kind of work with what we might want to do for a game. Like once we have the weights painted, we could start animating with this and just put it in a game. This would work for us. Sometimes it's nicer though to have controls, but it is sort of worth noting those controls aren't going to be able to go into Unity, and if we're doing movie stuff, we'd be putting keys onto our controls and just leaving them on the controls and not putting keys onto our joints, because they've already got some transforms, and it is nice to be able to say at times like zero certain things out for animation purposes. That's a nice feature to do. But because in games you end up having to remove the controls anyway, and because your keyframes have to be on the joints so that Unity can read them, you can kind of get away just with what you have here. But it is sort of nice to have some controls at times to pose the character and animate with that. You can, even if you have the controls, bake your keyframes that are on the controls onto your joints. So that's a thing that we'll do, and we'll need to bake our animations regardless. So it's not too big a deal if we have controls and we want to take our keyframes that are on those controls and bake them onto the joints. So as far as the controls, it's pretty quick. If we just say sort of source control rig, I probably should have saved before I did that too. Let's see if we can even go back. So let me just save, because you never know if it's gonna do something horrible. So just save again, and then we'll go back to our control, and then yeah. So let's see, control rig. Let's go back to, yeah, we'll delete the control rig. So yeah, so sometimes if you end up hitting buttons, things go haywire, and this may cause, it doesn't it doesn't like A poses, so it'll sometimes yell at you if you're in an A pose, and that can kind of cause issues sometimes. But we unlocked it, we deleted our previous control rig, so let's now that we've saved, actually maybe I should even save it again. Now let's try and maybe remake our control rig. And now we've got our control rig and it doesn't freak out. The nice thing with this, a lot of this will just be IK stuff, so you can kind of see we can move stuff right there from the arm. We could grab the elbow, we can move the elbow. You do normally want to orient the joints. I probably should have double checked that prior to making the control rig, and actually prior to binding it. I should have double checked for our orientation, and if I was like doing it a little nicer, like it's kind of okay, we can kind of move this in one direction. Let's actually, yeah, we're on object, so it's kind of close, like it kind of moves along the arm, but it could be a little bit better. It could kind of follow it a little better. Our joint placement on the wrist could probably be a little better. The reason for that is you want to just make sure, like when you're rotating, that you don't always have to like rotate in a couple different directions, because then you end up adding more transforms than you might not normally need, and it can just be a little bit more tedious to have to rotate in two directions. So it is worth sort of checking when you do put down your joints. You can just make sure they're sort of oriented correctly as you want them, and I probably should have double checked that to make that a little bit better. They're sort of okay now, but they could be a little bit nicer. So we've got that. Let's check out our foot. Now we want, when I pull this up, we want the knee to sort of kind of go up and forward, which is what we get. So that's good. Had we not kept this leg straight, when I pulled this up, the knee might bend out here. So let me grab maybe the lasso tool. We don't want the knee to bend out this way and come back. We don't want that. And we want this sort of bend forward. So that was sort of what I was referring to before with wanting to sort of have that little bit of a bend here and keeping this straight, so that when we pull this up, this will just kind of go up. You may see when you pull this forward, it's not too bad now, but you can kind of see a little bit of collapsing there. You know, that might be worth painting some weights on. And let's see. Let's kind of move that back to where it was. So there we go. So that's kind of working, and hey, why not? We've got it in somewhat of a stable state. Maybe we'll just save it there. And usually even when I save that, I might save a second iteration. So you can kind of see I just run through like crazy amounts of iterations, because you never know, especially when you go from one step to another, you never know if things are going to break. One thing we could do here, because we do have our transforms maybe aren't completely zeroed out. If I was to zero them out, you can see they kind of do some weird stuff. But I want to be able to like know where that is and keep that there. So I'm going to display my, let's see, I want to display my timeline. So I need to go to my UI. UI elements, time slider, range slider, and I'm going to open up, let's bring over our outliner again. So we've got all our joints here. I'm not necessarily, now that we've got a control rig, I'm not gonna put keys on our control rig. I'm gonna select our control reference at the top here, and then if you shift click these, it'll open up all of them. I'm just gonna go to the bottom and shift click the one at the bottom. And I'm gonna make sure, a lot of times this might say 1.5 or 2.5. Make sure you're at 1. So you're at the start of your timeline, your time frame here, and then I'm just going to hit S, and I'm just going to key the character in the T-pose, and then we can kind of save that. And then I should keep weighting this, but if we need to, like now what I can do is like I can move this into some kind of crazy position. And we can kind of check the weighting on it. See if we like it or not. It seems to kind of come through okay. Maybe we should, I bet with the hair and stuff, the chest is all out of whack. That's not too bad though. But say we wanted to weight that, we could, and then whenever we're done with that position, now that we've put a little keyframe in there, anytime I left click and scrub on the timeline, the character's just going to go back to where we want, which is great. That way we can then put the character just in any position for like weight painting purposes. And we can just test it out, and then we can easily put it back. So that's pretty much it. Like, I would just spend like a little bit more time on the weight painting, hopefully have fun maybe with a little bit of like character posing, just see how it bends, how it breaks, is there anything that could maybe be improved on it. Kind of looking okay there. This isn't, I'm sure that the hair and stuff need work on this, but not too off. We could take the knee here. Usually, that's maybe one other thing I was going to mention. With the arms, that's FK, meaning forward kinematics, meaning you can kind of, you can rotate from the arm and sort of from the in-between parts of the arm. Maybe let's say maybe we're going to pull this back or something like that. Maybe we'll pull the arm back or something. With with IK, that means inverse kinematics. A lot of times you use that on the ground so that you can kind of just grab the ankle and put the foot on the ground. So anytime you move with IK, you'll move sort of from the end point, meaning like the ankle or a wrist or something, to wherever it is you might want that thing. When you do that, you may lose a little bit of what would be like the in-between part here. So you end up, this doesn't rotate as much. Usually you're just gonna like move it in between. So just a heads up on that if you're trying to like move or play with some of the like limbs and stuff in that manner. This pose kind of sucks. I was hoping it would be something that might be cool. But we can kind of just keep looking at it from a bunch of different directions. Try and make something that's cool. You don't really have to put it in a pose. And actually it's probably better just when you hand it in, if it's in like a T pose or something like that. But that's pretty much it. I think that kind of covers everything. And yeah, if you just have the character in a T pose, let me pull up one more thing. Let's see, I'll just pull up the rubric real quick and we'll see what's inside of the rubric. Just so we can kind of see everything that we have. So you want to make sure your joints and your mesh are named properly. I combine this with the hair, so now it says hair instead of the character's name. If you make everything by hand, you have to name it by hand. If you do everything with the human IK, it'll name it for you, so that's like one less thing you have to worry about, but you do want to make sure that those are named. If for some reason you ended up putting in extra joints in like the spine, which you can do, you would want to make sure that you just name those joints also. You want to make sure that you don't have any extra history. That means like no editing the model, or don't edit at the UVs once you start rigging. You want to make sure the modeling and the editing is done once you start rigging, because you don't want history on here. When you do the weight, or when you bind the joint to the character, that's going to add a couple pieces of history, and they have to stay there. So leave these there. If you delete those, you lose your weight painting and you lose the skin bind. So you want to keep those, but you don't want a bunch of extra history sitting on top of that. So you just want like those two pieces. Make sure to check for joint orientation. The joint placement will be key, but and you know, like with that, you want to make sure, you know, just that it's relatively close. You don't want like here I had to put these a little bit, and actually as I'm looking at it, these are kind of off. They should probably be up here. I think the knee, yeah, the knee is right here. So like my joint placement here is off. I should have double checked and put them like right there where the cut is for the knee. So maybe I would take a point off for that on me because I messed that up. So just make sure they're like relatively close to where things are bending, and that may mean, you know, having to just move them a little bit and just double check the placement of some of them. You are going to have, like, these are a little further wide, and we did have to put these a little further forward, but we needed to do that for the IK, so like I'll know that'll be there for those reasons. But otherwise, you want to make sure you're not like bending the knee on the shin or, you know, something crazy like that. Foot IK, that we could make on our own. Generally, if you made it on your own, you would click the hip, then you shift click the ankle joint, and then you can say create an IK handle. If you do the human IK, it'll just make it for you, so that's already there, so you don't have to worry about it. Binding it is part of the process. When we did skin, bind skin, that bound it. Weighting is just making sure that it looks okay. Yeah, that foot IK doesn't let us bend there, but we can still sort of move this. Just making sure when you move the different pieces like that. That's kind of a broken hand movement, but that could use a little work probably. Maybe we don't need the t-shirt to move with this particular elbow, so maybe I could paint away some of the t-shirt there. That would probably help. We could keep a little bit of it, but maybe I could paint some of that away. So just little things like that. Just make sure you're checking your weighting. Having some controls, like you saw, we did the control rig, and then just making sure everything just turned in correctly. So hopefully that's not too bad. I put extra, like this video might come out at 45 minutes or an hour or so, but I really elaborated on a lot of stuff, just so it's all there. But you know, if all goes well, you might be able to get this done in 15 minutes. Sometimes things don't go so well and you run into issues like you kind of saw when I was tweaking. I sort of messed up a step, and then I tried to go back, and then the rig collapsed on itself, and then I needed to delete the control rig. Sometimes those things can happen and they can like spiral, and it's just things get worse and worse and worse. For me, I like to go back and just kind of start over, and that's also why I kept saving iterations. So save your iterations. If things go bad, you can just go back and redo them, and the whole process shouldn't take too long. And do try your control rate. Make sure your control rate kind of comes out okay, and then you can kind of do the weight painting, so you don't spend a bunch of time weight painting and then like lose all that work. Um, but hopefully, if things go well, 15, 20 minutes, maybe a half hour, and this can be completed. Sometimes if things don't go well, they take a lot longer. It could take, hours, or, if you run into problems, then maybe it gets into like a week or something like that. But hopefully it'll go smoothly. If you run into any issues, like, just let me know, shoot me an email or something like that. And I think that's pretty much it. Hopefully this works, and hopefully it's not too intimidating looking, because like the human IK bit makes things relatively simple, so it's not too bad. All right, good luck. Let me know how it turns out.